This is The Memory Palace. I'm Nate DiMeo. Anne Hodges had slipped into that state where you can't quite tell dreams from reality. She'd woken up early, as always, to make her husband breakfast and see him off to work. And then she started in on the housework. It was small, the house, but there were always things to dust or polish or wash or fold and put away. And while she worked, as always, she worried. Her husband was a tree trimmer for the phone company, and she didn't like that he was up on the ladder all day. Something could happen. Could touch a power line or slip with a saw or just fall. Around noon, her mom popped by as she often did, so Anne made them both sandwiches. But on this day, she was starting to feel kind of headachy and just not herself. And so she lay down on the couch in the living room and closed her eyes. And just as she had slipped into that state where you can't quite tell dreams from reality, there was a tremendous noise. She thought her whole house had exploded. She thought the Soviets were bombing Sylacauga, Alabama. But in reality, a meteor had come from space, pierced Earth's atmosphere, and then her roof, and then careened off her radio and smashed into her hip. She screamed, as one would. In her confusion and her pain, it hurt so much. Her hip was already purpling and swelling. She thought a neighbor kid had thrown a rock, but that rock there on her living room floor was hot to the touch. And even though it was a little smaller than a cantaloupe, it was too heavy for her to lift with one hand. And besides, what kid throws a rock through your ceiling? People all over Talladega County heard the blast, saw a fireball in the sky, thought it was a plane crash or an alien invasion. It was 1954, and there were always aliens invading in the movies in 1954. A policeman who was called to the scene was the first to suspect that the rock that had hit Anne Hodges was no ordinary rock. Later that night, a government geologist would inform her that the policeman's suspicions were correct. It was at that point the only thing that made sense to Anne. But he also told her something she could hardly believe. In the history of the world, a world that at that moment in November of 1954 contained about 2.7 billion people, that today is home to somewhere around 7.5 billion, a planet upon which approximately 110 billion people have ever lived, during the 150,000-ish years that people as we think of them now have lived on that planet, scientists believe, none of those people, not one, has ever been hit by anything fallen from space, except for Anne Elizabeth Hodges of Sylacauga, Alabama. The odds of being struck by this astronomical object were astronomical, and yet she was the only one. And what do you do when you find out that you are the only one? Anne Hodges started dreaming. As her life slipped into that space where it wasn't quite her own, where reporters came knocking at all hours, where neighbors kept coming by to see the hole and hear the story, see her bruise, where her living room started to feel like a tourist attraction. As she lay up at night, tallying doctor bills, the costs of roof repair, she started to wonder whether some good might come of this. Could they sell the rock that had struck her? Could she turn this calamity to her favor? Could, just maybe, she allowed herself to hope. Could it mean that her husband could leave his job, get down from that ladder, so she wouldn't have to worry so? Maybe they could put a down payment on a little farm, where her husband could be his own boss, get them out of their rented house. Maybe they could do that thing they'd always talked about, maybe wish for over birthday candles or on some shooting star. A trip to Hawaii, where her husband had been stationed during the war, back when his life seemed like it would be so much more. Maybe this fallen star could take them to Honolulu. A luau, grass skirts, a moonlit beach, fragrant flowers around her neck. That was the dream. The reality was, they didn't own their own home, and their landlord claimed the meteorite, and claimed that the Hodges had to pay for the hole it had made in their roof. Lawyers went back and forth about it for 2 years, during which time Anne was on the cover of magazines, even made it on the TV once or twice. Meanwhile, a neighbor of theirs sold a meteorite he'd found in his own backyard the same day Anne was struck in her rented living room, and he got a pretty penny for it. Paid off his mortgage, even had money left over for a car. But by the time the Hodges had settled their dispute, and bought the meteorite from their old landlord for $500 and hoped to sell it for much more. The market for meteorites had crashed, careened off the radio, and left them with little to show for it. They donated it to the Alabama Museum of Natural History a few years later. It's still there. Ann Hodges stayed in Alabama too. She never got to Hawaii. She got divorced. Her husband remarried a couple of times. She never did. She died of kidney failure when she was only 52. And there are stories that Ann Hodges suffered a breakdown about 10 years before her death. They suggest she couldn't handle the stress of it all, or that maybe she couldn't face the existential questions raised by being the only one. And maybe that's true. Maybe it was too much knowing that there was something that made her different from every other person who had ever walked the earth. Or maybe it was the disappointment of wishing that something could change your life, of letting yourself dream of something you never get to do. At least in that, she wasn't alone. This episode of The Memory Palace is written and produced by me, Nate DiMeo, with research assistance from Eliza McGraw. I get engineering assistance from Elizabeth Aubert. Rad music is composed by J.D. Sampson. This show is a proud member of Radiotopia, a collective of independent podcasts, out here following our own creative visions, trying to make a buck off our own work in an industry increasingly dominated by folks looking to make a buck off someone else's. Find out more at radiotopia.fm. And there you can learn about all of its shows, including Ear Hustle, a show that takes an unprecedented look into life inside San Quentin prison, as told by the prisoners themselves. They just started a new season with a new voice hosting from inside, while they also continue to follow its longtime host Earlonne Woods, as he transitions to life outside since his sentence was commuted last fall. It is a wonderful, wonderful show. You can find it and all the Radiotopia shows at radiotopia.fm. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook at The Memory Palace, or you can drop me a line at nate@thememorypalace.org. Talk to you again.
Radiotopia.